I'm trying to decorate an island inspired by the movie Encanto, and after already building an entrance inspired by this scene, the next area that needs to be recreated is the town. Let's see how that went. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am finally back with another Encanto island update. Admittedly, this island is taking quite some time to build up, not even to mention the amount of time it took me to make this video. But anyways, we're here now. All of this island building happened over on my Twitch channel, and the VODs for those are uploaded on my second YouTube channel called Sparksby Archive. Both of those will be linked down in the description box below. Now, before we get started, I'd say I'll give you a little update on all that happened so far. For this project, I of course started a brand new island and naturally called it Encanto. The resident rep is none other than Mirabel herself, and I additionally introduced her sisters Isabella and Luisa, as well as Abuela, as characters. I then worked on the perfect villager lineup as a reference to all the people and animals that we meet in the movie, worked on finding a good code selection to get started with, and also roughly planned the map. There will be 4 main areas as a reference to the movie. This diagonal bridge moment leading over into the town itself with a church and plaza, of course the casita, and also this big river built with butterflies. We already worked on the first area to create our island entrance with lots of greenery, some horses posing as donkeys, and of course the bridge itself. That area is now done and it's time to focus on the town. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? The very first thing that I had to do was plan the houses using some in-game pathing. I wanted to make sure that you could see one house from the entrance already, and then you would kind of walk across the resident services plaza to get to the town center. I briefly had to log in with Luisa's character to move her house out of the way, and then I did the same thing with Abuela's as well. That's better. Now, if we compare this back to the reference picture, you basically walk right into the town and you can see lots of houses right away. So I actually ended up putting 2 houses across from the bridge. As I worked through this planning, I just kind of tried to imagine how the path would lead you and how to layer the houses for a good view. Sometimes I also use storefronts to try and picture what the built houses would look like. In this case, I then made some small adjustments so you'd see the houses a bit more clearly. And then I also planned on putting some more fake houses next to these, so you'd basically be forced to walk across the resident services plaza. Also, oh my god, look at my storage. It is so colorful. I was like really getting excited to start decorating on this island. I had roughly planned the main town part to be on the right-hand side of resident services. So I once again just tried to imagine the path and how you would walk through the town to figure out where to place what buildings. One house would go directly next to resident services with another one close by. And I don't want to waste too much of the island space, so I also kind of wanted to make sure that the path leads you like down for a bit and you circle around, so we use all the space that we have. So let's put the shop right here. Going past the shop and then towards the left would be kind of where I want the casita to be, so that's where you need to end up in the end. So most of the town plaza would need to be to the right of Nook's Cranny. I also thought about like including a corn farm towards the bottom here and then maybe cutting off the beach on the right hand side, so I started just mapping out a couple of more houses. This was kind of complicated because I had a bunch of the starter houses still kind of here and therefore blocking the space. Sometimes I also intentionally kept some space between the different houses for possible fake buildings. I will be honest though, this process was kind of random. I really just tried to imagine the path and kind of how the houses might look like. Oftentimes I place them in pairs and then just kind of hope for the best, which would come back to bite me later. I also wanted to include the tailors in this town as well, so I planned that in the top right corner of the town and then left a decent bit of space open towards the left-hand side because I actually wanted to recreate a big church here. Now there's only 2 more houses I need to tie in now, maybe the campsite also, but the crops here kind of made this all a bit confusing and I quickly realized I would just not have enough room here at all, so I decided to actually expand the town a bit further than I had originally thought and push the houses further to the back. The campsite would potentially be part of the town square in the future. After moving all the crops, flowers, and shrubs out of the way to ensure that we'd have a clean slate here in the future, this was the process for the first stream, and here is what the map looked like at this point, with all those path snippets being the house placements. With a new day and a new stream, I also found a new outfit that Mirabel might possibly wear from Able Sisters, just so she doesn't always wear the same. And then after a brief freak out at how cute the sporty babies are, I got to work on moving all those houses. First up, I moved Bunny right to the entrance of the town along with Poncho right next to her. This would also be kind of close to the casita since it'll be kind of behind this area, and with them portraying Dolores and Antonio from the movie, that just kind of seemed like the right decision. Murphy, aka Bruno, was next, and I placed his house next to resident services, and then moved in Samson portraying the rats alongside him. Next up, I will also move the shop. This preview admittedly already made me doubt this decision, as I wasn't really sure how we would make this quite beachy shop style fit the vibe of the Encanto town. Next up, let's also move the tailor shop to the previously decided location, and then these two house spots here seem perfect for the little kids from the movie, which are represented by both Flurry and Hamlet on this island. Flurry will move in on the left-hand side, Hamlet on the right. In the meantime, the workout squad was spotted taking a break and munching on some ice cream. Good for them. The next house I moved was Bo's, who is supposed to represent Mariano, to the bottom right. And even though it seemed like a good layout at first, I now started having my first doubts here, because it just seemed so much more staggered than I had imagined. I then also wanted to group together Timbra and Leonardo, who was still Kyle at the time, and since they are supposed to represent Antonio's animal friends, they will move in above the shop, still somewhat close to the future casita. And last but not least, we also moved Tammy, who seems to love this island a lot, by the way. This would ultimately be Frank posing as the toucan from the movie, and since birds can fly, it's okay to put him like the furthest away from everything, right? Now, for ease of understanding, I'll refer to the villagers with their Animal Crossing names going forward. Just know that these are the characters that they're supposed to represent. Also, the working out on this island is getting out of hand. By the way, the campsite was still kind of planned for the center here, but since I did plan on covering the entire plaza with in-game pathing and custom designs, having a building here would lead to some weird gapping, so I kind of just still left it open for now. A brand new day and a brand new daily fit for Mirabel, and today's task would be to establish the vibe and aesthetic of what I actually wanted to do here. First up, of course, I would need to figure out this path situation, which basically needed to be in-game path with this flagstone coat on top. So I started laying out the light dirt path right in front of these first two houses. A moment of silence, please, for the weeds that I had to sacrifice. Thank you. At first, I brought the path all the way up to the bridge, but I hate how this looks with diagonal bridges, so I then decided to take a bit away again and implemented a bit of nine-tail pathing here instead. I lined it up with the resident services plaza on the right-hand side, so the plaza would just kind of appear as part of the pathing here. I took a little more away on the left-hand side and then added more to the bottom towards the river, which I initially shaped when I worked on the entrance, by the way. And now time to cover all of this with the flagstone custom design. I had 4 different ones to choose from here, so the way that I did it was to stand down and cover everything just using the app and just one of the tiles, and then later I would go in with the path tools and swap some of those with the other 3 designs that I have for some details and variation. By the way, any custom designs that I use on this island as well as their original creator can be found on my website, sparksby.com/encanto. I wasn't really the biggest fan of the little bit of grass that you see in between the different pathings, or also, the path in the plaza here, so I went in to remove a little bit more by the entrance, so that transition just seems a bit more like natural. Maybe I can also cover some of the gaps with like wheat fields or other items later on. And then this was also the moment where I realized that if I wanted all of this to be path, then I would basically not have any room for trees, which I absolutely hated. Now, I could go in and remove little pieces of the custom design and then add trees basically like on the pathing, but then that made me realize that I actually wanted to use a bunch of coconut trees to stay true to the reference, but those can only grow on sand pathing, and we just got done covering this entire part with path, like twice. So I needed a solution. At first I thought maybe just like a sand tile whenever I wanted the specific trees, but that gapping really is not it. So after a small little test on the side, there really only was one solution. Remove all the custom designs and replace the path with the sand version. With the sand path put down now, I roughly planned a couple of tree spots around the left-hand side, and then it was time to cover everything in the custom designs. Again, what a fun task. By the way, I like to use these individual vines to keep track of my planned tree spots if I just need to move on to like a different task for the time being, like in this case, redoing the house exteriors. Poncho got a blue siding with a brown roof and berry colored door along with some flowers, and Bunny got a yellow siding with a green roof, blue door, and also some flowers. And then time to add those details to the path by implementing the different flagstone tiles like I've mentioned before, and also time travel to see the houses redone. I wanted a little backdrop for the houses, so I kind of experimented with a bit of fencing here, and then ended up going for the vertical board fence in yellow and blue. And I also planted a couple more trees and shrubs to test what the gapping and transitional parts would look like. Next up, I also downloaded some more of the sidewalk pieces that I planned on using and started implementing that as well. I was still missing the corner pieces at this point, and honestly, I wasn't really sure I liked the look 100%, but since I kind of didn't want to judge it too much with nothing around it like decorated yet, I decided to just kind of push through for now. And then let's also try and actually place some things to start getting this together. A covered wagon with a horse, more trees. I'll be using a mixture of coconut trees as well as bamboo and hardwood trees in all the different stages, some plants and barrels around the houses, and since I also planned on putting the villager pictures in front of the houses, I also placed some stools down. Let's start growing some of that greenery. And it's already looking so much better now. By the way, some of the trees I would have to stand on the path for now, which means I need to remove even more of the custom design to plant the sapling. Admittedly, this looks a little awkward, but I can fix this for the DA, so we just won't worry about it too much. As a reference to Isabella spawning all the flowers all around Encanto, I kind of wanted to plant flower clusters, which basically just means always planting a bunch of the same colored flowers in one spot. So I got started on that here with some pink flowers to check out if the transition between the different pathings would work, and then proceeded to also add some more blue flowers and shrubs to the mix. And then I was quite happy with the start of the town like this. Off stream, I also ended up covering everything around the houses in sand pathing and decided against the campsite here since it just didn't feel like the vibe really. I'll just put it on the beach somewhere and focus on this being the town center instead. And then I spent the next couple of streams decorating the entrance, which also included this filler part on the left of our first two houses. If you're interested in any of that process, the video will also be in the description box below. And then with the entrance done, now it was really time to focus on the town again. At this point, I'd also managed to cover the entire sand path with the flagstone coat as well. I already hinted at this earlier, but the house cluster on the bottom right wasn't really working out the way I'd planned because I just didn't really like it in any frame. At first, I tried implementing a little cliff maybe so the view would be better, but that didn't really help much at all, so I got the idea of maybe just moving Bo to a different place. Before I start making any rash decisions here though, I opted to just customize some houses first. Let's start with Murphy and give him a brown siding and dark roof with a beige door and some green mums for the green vibes. Kind of like Bruno's eyes when he's doing the visions, you know? Samson will get a pink tinted siding with a blue roof and door and the fruit wreath because rats would love that, right? Leonardo will get a yellow siding with orange roof and green door, and Timber's house will be this burnt orange color with a blue roof and beige door, and both of them will also get a flower wreath. At this point, I already decided to time travel to see them all changed and check out if they'll kind of work together. Let's also reuse Bunny's exterior for Bo, as that might be a cute little storyline detail, and then focus on the kids' houses next. Flurry will get this pink siding, brown roof, and green door along with a flower wreath. And then I wanted to talk to Hamlet, but he actually wasn't feeling all that great, so we quickly delivered some medicine and a get well soon card and promised to be back. I also briefly changed Leonardo's roof to be red, gave Mirabel a new fit, and then started a brand new day. Hamlet was actually feeling loads better at this point, so he was open for some brainstorming. We agreed on a beige siding with a green roof and berry colored door, along with some flowers. For Tammy, yep, she's still here, soon to be frank, we had a blue siding, beige roof, and yellow door planned, along with some more fruits, because birds would also love that, right? And then I got all of these prepared and decided that I did like them, but it still kind of didn't feel like a full-on town, so it was time to think about some fake houses as well. First up, I needed to figure out what type of buildings or structures I even wanted to put together. So I gathered a couple of things for my storage and used this open space to the bottom to just kind of test around a bit. I quickly figured out that I really like the pergola to pose as the main building, as that kind of makes it look as though there's like flowers growing on the roof, and then I could use storefronts to surround it and give it actual outside walls. The spacing here seemed a little weird at first, but after a bit of trying around, I ended up finding a layout that actually works quite well. 2 storefronts in the front and back, and then 1 on each side, which will leave you with this 1 tile of open space for the sides. I did find that filling this with either a wooden or ranch wardrobe works quite well because they all come in a bunch of different colors, and you could even place something else on top, like even more flowers. Or if you place this entire building correctly on the grid, you can even plant a full-on tree in this spot, which I personally find quite handy. And then generally using trees around the building or also some items along the side also helps it blend in. I actually ended up reusing this type of building a bunch of time, also because of all the different color options. And so we put one next to Leonardo's and one next to Murphy's house. And I also wanted something here at the corner of resident services to hide some of those like edges of the plaza and make it look more like a full-blown town. The one at the bottom ended up being a combination of the pergola with the orange flowers with the green storefronts. The one next to Bruno's house, I ended up shifting a little further back than initially planned and then decided to go for the purple flower pergola with the yellow storefronts. I also thought about having another fake building to the left of resident services, and while I generally like this, the spacing struggles here made me almost quit and give up, so I'll save you that struggle mostly. I did have to move around some of the flowers and trees that I'd already planted here before, and I also decided that it would have no back part to this building essentially, so just some walls to the front and on the side. Fun fact though, that actually allows you to walk into this house, which is kind of fun. After removing this again piece by piece, just to implement some pathing underneath, as well as some more fillers around the edges, I then reassembled the building with the yellow storefronts and the purple pergola, and then went over to planting some tree spots around the front of the building. I also placed some wheat fields and natural things around the front and used a couple more items around the corners to tie it into the surroundings. For the building by Leonardo's house, I decided to go for the green storefronts with the orange pergola, and then I put another fake building in between Poncho and Murphy. This time, I wanted to kind of make a two-tiered one though. I started building the necessary cliff for this and then put down some storefronts. 3 next to each other just seemed kind of like a good size, but when I then filled in the pergola building next to it, it all seemed a bit too cramped, so I just moved that building over to the right by half a tile. With a few tree spots planned in this part, that already helped this area blend together a little more nicely. So I like the width of this building that I'd created, but I did decide to actually reduce the top layer to just 2 storefronts so we can just use the open tiles on the sides for more items. I feel like the shape of that building just makes a little bit more sense that way. First, I tried some hedge fencing, but that wasn't really tall enough, so I added some plants behind it, which is better, but not great yet. Okay, well, let's switch all these storefronts to be the correct color for now. And then I actually had the idea of continuing that vertical board fence from the bottom left and also put in the tree on the left so that we can really imagine this. Yeah, I like the yellow fence option. Whenever I use storefronts, I also really like combining it with the curtain partition or clothesline in front of it. So that's what I did here as well. Curtain partition goes on the bottom level, and after moving everything around a tiny bit more, the clothesline goes on the top level. These will be customized in the future, by the way. And then after some more tree planting and time traveling and adjusting, that's where I kind of left it for the day. Off stream, I had also added the small corn farm in front of resident services with some more of the colored fence, and then this day started with taking stock and making a couple of plants. I wanted to change the 2-tiered building that I just created last stream to be with the brown storefronts instead, as lots of the houses in the Encanto town are somewhat like a beige color, and then the building next to Murphy would be green with maybe an added building next to the corn farm. I also decided against using the museum for the church that I'd planned of building because I'd be able to plant a couple more trees that way, and I also started disliking nooks more and more. That being said, today's main task would be to recreate this church that you see in the We Don't Talk About Bruno song. First up, I started gathering a bunch of the castle items. This would be my first time building with them, so I kind of needed to just estimate their size and kind of get used to them a little bit first. And I quickly realized I would definitely have to have another cliff to make this a taller building. According to the reference, it kind of looks like there's these tall towers on both sides, but then trying one of the castle towers on the ground floor and then one on the next one up definitely wasn't it just yet. So I carried out a little test on the side to see if putting the second tower on a second level would look better. And it kind of does. So the next step, of course, would be to build the base cliff for all of this. I was especially struggling with how to work around the corners of the church to make it look somewhat decent. I started putting up a couple of the walls and also tried including some pillars, and then I quickly realized that I could extend the cliff further to the left and shift everything over a bit. The next issue I encountered then was that of symmetry. My plan was to use a combination of the castle walls, which are 2 tiles wide each, as well as the gate. This one is 3 tiles wide though, which means everything would turn out all wonky. Well, time to really decide how wide this church needs to be then, and also try out those towers on the bottom level. I didn't have all the items or correct colors at this time, so I just kind of put some stuff together to try and imagine the finished product. I did some more cliff building for the church base and additional tower, and I actually kind of liked this. I would just have to figure out all the weird gaps and edges, and I also wanted to kind of include a nuptial bell. Turns out I actually need even more cliff base than I had initially thought. Let me just use this moment to really give props to anyone creating fake buildings or also perspective stuff, because I got so confused about the spacing in this process. All right, once put in for now, I also tried a couple more things to hide the gap between the church and Abel's, but then quickly decided to put that off for now. Taking a brief break from the church building, I also tried implementing a couple of storefronts around nooks to maybe help blend that building in a little bit better with the surroundings. In this process, I also decided to rewatch the music video for Family Material and realized that that flagstone path and the sideboard bricks are actually somewhat different to the plaza brick, so I will probably have to find a different code for that one. With this revelation, it would also make sense to place an additional sidewalk like all around the plaza. The flagstone path would therefore actually be more of a path with the plaza space in front of the church. I decided to do some code searching, and even though this one didn't feel like the ideal one just yet, I decided to kind of implement it for now and go through with it. I put some more of the sidewalk towards the church in the front and then all around it, and also tested the new plaza tiles just to figure out like the general idea as well as the spacing and shape of the actual path. In my futile attempts to like Nook's Cranny and also put the path on the right hand side in a little bit of a better shape with our new plans, I wanted to move the shop a tile further to the left. So I went ahead and moved it out of the way and then acquired the items that I still needed for the church. Next up, I moved Nook's Cranny to where I wanted it and then fixed and changed the path next to it so it would run closer to the building. I also fixed up the corner on the left, added more to the path right below, and then made some more adjustments to the path on the right of the shop. And of course, I also brought back the flagstone custom designs as well. Then I went in and extended the sidewalk next to the church plaza all the way up to the front, and I also adjusted the part to the left and filled in all the codes here as well. I would really like to say trust the process at this point, because watching this back is honestly a little wild, but I know that we're heading into a good direction, so trust me. I brought the sidewalk all around the back of the plaza as well, and then started filling in that new code. I struggled a bit around the corners because I hadn't really made like right angled corners before like you would with a regular path, but then just these like weird corner shapes. We'll actually get back to this issue in a bit. At this point, I also finally placed down the castle gates, which I liked, but also realized you could see the cliff through the gate on both cliff levels, and you could see the sky behind the bell, which, safe to say, I would need to find a solution for that later. I also worked a bit more on the sidewalk to the right-hand side and filled in the rest of the plaza tiles. Once done, I definitely did not like the corner of the plaza on the right-hand side, since it just all felt like really wonky. And I definitely wanted a different plaza tile, maybe something with a bit more of a red tint so it fits the others a little better. A potential solution for our castle gate issue might actually be some panels, and indeed, a combination of the symbol panel in the bottom tier and then maybe the short symbol panel a level higher would work. I would just have to find like a dark red or brown door code, kind of like in the reference. At this point, I also finally swapped the castle towers for the correct version and tried some more decorative pillars around the side parts. And then, as I had decided at the start of the stream already, I also changed the fake building behind our resident services to brown, and the pergola building next to that to the green and orange instead. You'll notice I'm going back and forth between like a few different projects all around the town, because sometimes I tend to get overwhelmed with certain decisions and then need just kind of like a break to work on something else first. Or I might also just not have the needed items at the time and then just put them in once I acquire them. Just like I also remembered to customize the curtain partition for the building with a colorful fabric code. Back to the plaza, I shaped the sidewalk on the right hand side to a straight one and then adjusted the custom designs around it. I also reduced the length of the plaza because it seemed like awkwardly long and narrow, and of course then went ahead and fixed the corner on the left as well. All of this path and custom design adjusting made me realize that putting the flagstone path with its sidewalk into like an actual road shape was much prettier than the more like natural corners that I had attempted before. So I made my way further around to change some more of the corners. Further to the left, behind Nook's Cranny, in the top left corner, and in the top right corner by Able Sisters. I also added some more to the cliff behind behind Able Sisters and tried planting a coconut tree as well. You can actually see this one from the front, so I decided against the decorative pillars and then just tried using some other items here instead. As previously discussed, I also wanted to try and block the sky behind the nuptial bell. I extended the base cliff for this top tier and then placed some castle walls behind it. Now, that kind of helps. It's not really perfect, but honestly, I think I'm just overthinking this a little bit. And then that was enough decision making for the day. A brand new day and back to the two-tiered building to customize the clothesline and also add some wooden tables and lilies to the side. Now it also kind of looks like there's flowers growing on this roof. Today would basically be another day of random progress all around the town. The first thing I did was fill in this cliff behind the church so that I would be able to put up another one of those fake buildings behind Leonardo and Timbra's house, kind of like the layered neighborhood housing that you see in this reference picture. I started using green storefronts here to figure out the basic shape I wanted, but soon after decided to switch to the gray version. I laid some pathing underneath and then assembled the building along with some fencing and the table lily combination I discovered, and I also put a curtain partition on the bottom level. In this case though, the flowers didn't actually show up enough, so I tried a Moroccan footrest with flowers in front of the storefront instead, and also decided to move the curtain partition to the upper level. I kind of like this, but the fabric code wasn't quite it, so I changed that to something a bit more colorful, and then also included a garden wagon on the bottom level. That is much better, right? Now let's just move that all to the side a little bit so it's not quite as centered. Nope, wrong side. Yep. There we go. And then I was in grave danger of caging myself in over here, so I removed the pergola building, landscaped all of this a bit further, and then extended the gray storefronts further to the left and right. I also filled in more cliff behind this house, added some vines here, and decided to fix the gaps around the church and implement whatever plaza tile that we would end up using on the upper cliff as well. Once I had reassembled everything, I also used the wheat field and schefflera along this upper edge and planted a coconut tree. And now it is time to work on that fake building that I wanted in front of resident services. Maybe another two-tiered one, just like the one behind it. I first built up a cliff for the general outline. I did want it like pretty far in front of resident services, but because I also wanted to have a tree here, I kind of had to try around a little bit and then actually decided to just remove this bit of cliff behind the storefront. I also added a little path and included some yellow hyacinths to give this little farm more of a corn vibe, and then planted another coconut tree. This gap here I would now fill with a wardrobe and some flowers, and then I added another storefront upstairs as well as to the sides, and of course mirrored the wardrobe and flower setup on the other side as well. Some other small tasks that I took care of at this point were giving Timbra a Moroccan footrest for her photo, fixing up some pathing underneath the pergola building by Murphy's house, and also planting some more trees in between. I customized the simple panels by the church to be the rusted version and then looked for a door code. I still needed to get the short simple panels at this point, but this looks promising, right? And then I had planned on turning this empty part next to Able Sisters into this corn farm from the movie. So I went ahead and gathered all the sugar cane that I could find and moved them to this part. I also added some more vines to the cliffs in the back and then got right to planting, as I would need a lot more sugar cane. I was able to acquire the short simple panels and therefore finalize the church, more or less. My next project would be shaping this cliff behind the Taylors and around the corn farm into something a little more pretty, and then I spent quite some time watering and growing in the sugarcane, and meanwhile also planned a couple more tree spots all around this part, in which I kind of tried to somewhat hide the cliffs in the back just behind some foliage. I had to make some more cliff changes here and then spread around the trusted combination of coconut trees as well as hardwood and bamboo, and mark the different growth stages with the custom design. With the rest of the sugarcane placed back down, let's get all this grown and stunted. As I was running back and forth in this process, I also placed a schefflera to the right of the church and some wheat fields around the corn farm. The frame from the movie that serves as inspiration for this almost seems like it's planted diagonally, so I kind of tried mimicking that same thing and adapted the crops towards the front. And then with everything grown and just a few adaptations, I also added some dirt path leading up to the farm and included a leaf pile to hide the gap between the different paths meeting. And last task for the day, getting some more yellow hyacinths to spread them throughout the corn farm. It was a bit messy and all over the place today, but we definitely made a lot of progress. Let's start the new day with a new outfit for Mirabelle and a little update, as I had done a tiny bit more landscaping around the back of the island and added the fake building next to Leonardo's house back in again, basically just like the one that we had done before. And then it is finally time to change the plaza code and go from this to this. Bit more of a red tint, and it seems way better to me. This one even comes with some steps that I could implement in front of the church entrance, so let's fix up that little part as well. I also added another little horse to the corn farm, and then today's plan was to finish all the fake buildings so that I could finally get started on all the detailed decorations. I kind of showed this before, but according to the reference, it looks like the houses sometimes are even in these like multiple tier type of neighborhoods, so I wanted to tie that in some more whenever possible. One area to do that would be the start of the town where Bunny and Poncho live. So I started putting up a cliff behind those houses to then place down some medieval building sites. I definitely like the idea of that. It would just have to be a bit more detailed by adding a couple of things in front of the walls, as well as trying to hide the sky behind the window, because of course. With that general idea in place, my next step would be to really figure out how exactly the walls would need to be placed and also decide on specific colors I wanted to use. I added more base cliff to the sides and then also tried to hide the cliff edges that you could see between the different houses with some storefronts. I actually really like this since it kind of looked somewhat like those wooden doors in the reference picture. For even more color, I planned on having the pink medieval building sites and then decided to push them back another tile to then potentially incorporate a couple of plants in the front. A little side note, I was missing a couple of items at this point again, so it was just kind of trying around a bit to see what I would need to acquire and then incorporate. To help with hiding the sky that's currently visible through the windows, I just thought about having another building site like turned backwards. They wouldn't really align nicely, unfortunately, but it kind of works from the forced perspective of the front. And of course, I will also try to incorporate a tree here. It only really shows up from a certain perspective, but honestly, this is good enough for me. I added in the rest of the storefronts behind the houses and then also fixed up the part on the left-hand side. The right-hand side here, I wasn't really sure about at first, but then decided to connect those cliffs and even test out how it would look like if we connected the fake buildings all the way behind the houses as well. I kind of struggled here with the transition between the previous fake build as well as the new one that we did, and even ended up removing the flowers to try a tree in that spot instead. I only had a large coconut at the time, so we would need to see about this the next day. It did kind of help though, and I started liking this setup, and as the medieval building sites on the left would be in pink, I wanted these to be in yellow. I also placed on a pillar where the two colors would meet, and with a cactus set on top, it almost looks like the cactus grew on the roof. As though Isabella was here, right? Always and forever struggling with Nook's Cranny, I finally made the decision to grab the moving kit from Nook. I had to move a bunch of flowers around, but then was able to place the shop on the beach. I would somewhat be able to decorate in this future, but finally this wasn't part of the town anymore. And with some space now opening up, I next up decided to move Bo's house into this gap. I fixed up the path in front of it, planted a coconut tree behind the house, and then went in and added a green storefront building right next to the house. This is honestly so much better already. Of course, this now somewhat messed up the villager area that I previously created on the right-hand side, so the new plan was to get Frank's house, still Tammy, up on a second-tier cliff so that this could be used to get a good overview of Flurry and Hamlet's house. I realized that Hamlet's house would probably look way better if it was moved a bit closer to Flurry's. And with that in mind, I first needed to build up a decent size of cliff to be able to place the house down, as well as an incline leading up. Tammy's house was actually kind of blocking this area at the point, so just a small break to move it out of the way, and then more cliff shaping. I changed the street to match the new cliff and then marked a potential spot for an incline to get an idea of how to actually shape the cliff all around that. And on the right hand side, I decided to just follow the shape of the beach, and after adding just a bit more cliff on all the different sides, I started planning the location of the house on top. I added some more cliff in the back as well to give it more of a natural shape there, and then I also still needed to adjust the left hand side as well as the front so it's not quite such an awkward long cliff. Okay, let's take a second to actually fix up the street here by removing all the unnecessary codes and then fixing up the sidewalk bricks. And with that, now let's move Tammy's house back in. Hopefully this will work out. And for the incline, I opted for the blue ramp for now. In preparation for Hamlet moving, I already changed up the end piece of the path there, and then I made the street next to our cliff a bit straighter, as well as moved the sidewalk further to the left, so that the general width of the street would fit the rest of the town. Once this new layout was established, I of course needed to go back in once again to fix up all the codes, and there we go. A few more lines on the cliff edges, and then it's time to look at the house almost an incline once they had been built. Spoiler alert, I was not really happy with the incline. After some slight adjustments to the cliff, I then also put in some 9-tail pathing towards the beach. Once I got to the tree planting part though, I realized that I'd kind of covered some of the best spots with pathing, so I then focused on the trees first and then adapted the path afterwards. And with that, yet another stream ended with some decent progress. Off stream, I had exchanged the medieval building sites behind Bunny's house to be pink and also moved Hamlet's house as previously talked about. With so much house moving and path work in the last few streams, I finally wanted to figure out some decorations for the town part. I grabbed a whole bunch of items and decided to start with this area around Murphy's house. As the first thing, I established some stools or similar things to put down the characters' pictures. I also added a barrel to bridge the gap behind the tree next to Samson's house and some flowers in front. In my item gathering, I'd also gotten out some of the flower stands that I just kind of dropped off by the plaza for later decorating. Bo's house would also get a barrel, a cypress plant for Murphy, and then another covered wagon in this part as well. Some of these items would definitely be moved around a bit to find the more or less perfect placements, and then I gave Bo, aka Mariano, the cactus set since he does get poked by one in the movie. And for some more plant vibes, I also placed a cacao tree here. One item I kind of thought would be perfect in its color is the flower bed. I initially didn't like this item at all though because it always seems super awkward to place. However, when I placed one on the sidewalk here, I was actually surprised because I did actually really like it. Like so much so, I thought about lining the entire sidewalk with them. Someone in chat also had the idea of putting fences between the flower beds, and after trying a few different ones, I decided to go for the wooden fencing in blue and green. A short break to use some of the leftover stools I had in my pockets for the houses on the side so that I could also place their pictures here. And then, like I said, I was quite happy with the fences and flower beds, so I plan to continue it on all the horizontal pieces of a sidewalk. I also gave Poncho the yellow boxy stool for his picture, and then I had a few random things left in my pockets. I plopped a forsythia by Bo's house, a cypress plant by Leonardo's, and a tiny library in front of Samson's house. I wanted a few of the covered wagons all over town, so with the one behind Bo's house, I also decided to place another one in the front, a little further to the right. That seemed a pretty decent distance. And I also used this opportunity to put some pathing underneath that storefront building, plant a coconut tree on the corner in front, and put a monstera by the flower beds. I kind of thought about moving this one pergola house a bit more to the left so that we can have more visible flower beds and kind of some greenery in between. I did end up doing this off stream though. As you walk through the streets here, I feel like it'd be nice if you can also see a few more items to the bottom. So I decided to take some inspiration from the entrance and make a little barrel and box cluster here, and I planted a couple more trees around this part. One delivery later, it was time to exchange the flower beds, add some codes underneath the barrels, and add in some more horses. And then the street itself almost looked a bit bare compared to all the colorful flowers and items around it. So I went ahead and placed some different leaf and petal piles, as well as dropped some flowers and even candy as a reference to the delivery that Mirabel gets at the start of the movie. Some more tree planting around that little bit of green that we left in the town, and then I time traveled to get these grown, planted another tree by Hamlet's house on the side, and added a cactus set to the barrels that I'd placed before. Another pretty decent progress stream. As promised, the pergola building has now been moved further to the left, and as a side note, the campsite now found its new position on the beach, where it actually would end up staying. With a lot of the surrounding parts underway, today's plan would be to focus on the town square, as I wanted to recreate 4 different things from the movie. The food setup Mirabel's mom has, various games, this little music setup, and the wide variety of flowers that Isabella brings to the town. As of right now, the plaza was just kind of this big empty area and missing tons of height. In the movie, you actually do see coconut trees all around it, so my first course of action would be to figure out a couple of tree spots all around this on the sidewalk. Therefore, I went ahead and wiped away parts of the sidewalk to plant some fresh trees. Let's get started with the food setup. First, I needed to test a few different tables to display different dishes and items. Apart from those, I also grabbed a bunch of other stuff that would fit this food theme, especially anything that looked even remotely close to arepas. And then I got started setting up the project table with some barrels over to the left side of the plaza and worked in the scones as the arepa substitute along with a veggie basket. When working on displays like this, I'll often just start placing things down to figure out how they work together in their composition before I then actually focus on getting the colors right and or adding the perfect details. So I added some stools, tried around with the food on different surfaces, and added some bread and wheat as well. At this point, I also remembered that I actually had a few coconut trees prepared, so I started exchanging all the different saplings with the actual trees. That makes it look like 10 times better already. Let's fix up some of those colors for the food setup next. I also added some lilies to the left for a pop of color and switched the items around to find the best display. And afterwards, my plan was to kind of hide the background a little bit more. So I started adding some barrels and boxes here and put some select flower items in the back to kind of imagine this a little bit better. Can we also just take a moment to talk about the awkward flower stand, by the way? I changed the tree by Bo's house to a smaller version and added a little reference to the goldfish from the movie. And then with the food setup at a good point, I gathered a bunch of items for the next little area and started working on the music part. I put down the bamboo bench and stool and also thought about the partition, which I didn't hate, but the covered wagon in the back kind of distracted me. So I just grabbed that one and moved it to the center of the plaza instead, and then went back to incorporating some instruments to the music setup, like different drums, a ukulele, and also maybe some plants. All right, brief pause to fix whatever code issue this is, some flowers by the music setup, and then back to struggling with the backdrop of this part. A monstera looks good there, and maybe a smaller plant on a Moroccan footrest. The covered wagon in the center also, of course, deserved a little horse, and then I tried out the storefront to hide the Able sisters. Usually, I don't like covering buildings with like fake sidings like that, but in this case, I felt like it actually somewhat worked. Just a little struggle with these regarding the specific placement, and then I decided to have two storefronts kind of hugging this building with some plants around the corner, and then I also added some vases along with wheat fields around this part. All right, let's move on to the sporty game setup. I'll start with some Festivali garlands as a backdrop. Now in the movie, it looks as though the basketballs are in this kind of big wooden box, but in Animal Crossing, the available ball catcher is kind of made out of metal, it seems. So my goal here would be to kind of hide that metal container. I included some wooden boxes and barrels around it, and then the great shifting of items started. At some point, I had also decided to use two ball catchers, and then I had the idea of maybe using the vertical board fencing as like a makeshift wooden container for the basketballs. It's not bad, but it's still kind of too obvious, so I really needed to add in a couple more items to help this along. The boxes and a plant are maybe a different setup after all. I had a short little breakdown about this part, don't mind me. Let's just make a couple more changes, or maybe just return it to the way it was. Okay, brief distraction, let's just put some more horses in the plaza. And then a cypress for the background, ring toss, wooden box with coin, coffee plant, and a barrel with a ball later, and I was finally kind of happy with this. I added some more stack bags and fencing to the left, and there we go. Now I would just need to do some time traveling to get the trees to the correct size, and with all the decision power used up, like really used up, it was time to call it a day. The next time started with a nice little discovery because somewhere along the way we had actually reached 5 stars in the island rating. And then on to the last area for the town square, a flower setup as a reference to Isabella. And of course I would need to add a whole more details as well, so once again, let's get started by gathering a whole bunch of items. A brief pit stop to add the casserole to the food setup, start spreading a couple of leaf piles around the front, and also adding this random dish to the music area because my plan was basically to include a little bath bucket, like those hats, you know, where you can throw some coins into. I just didn't have that at the time. In addition to the leaf piles, I also grabbed some plucked flowers that I started dropping around, and now let's focus on that flower setup. I start with a garden wagon and some wooden boxes. One item I actually rarely ever use in Animal Crossing is the forsythia, but now would be the perfect time, right? I customized the wooden box to be green and add a schefflera next to the church to block that cliff with a bit of greenery. Let's also add another garden wagon to the mix and move the wooden box to the other side instead. Meanwhile, I changed my mind about the forsythia again and I implemented some lilies instead, and then I added another Festivali garland backdrop to this display as well as a vase. It seems like I might just need a few more details here now. Maybe a heart-shaped bouquet, a wooden stool. Oh, and let's bring back the forsythia, yes? Okay, now it feels like there's a little bit too much yellow, so let's change the flower stand and then actually highlight the forsythia by bringing it to the front so the turquoise pot is more visible. I also added another wooden box to the back and another plant to the very front. Now I'll just have to go around this part and also add in some more leaf piles, drop flowers, and petals. And then a short delivery later, we also put in the bath bucket. And it's cute, right? But the town still is not quite done. Let's take care of some fillers here and there. Some plants by Flurry's house, another carriage and horse close by, more leaf piles by the game stand, as well as a cacao tree. And then speaking of games, it is time to play my favorite one, Can This Be a Tree? As I decided that this part behind the campsite would be mostly colorful fillers, I needed to provide quite a bit of foliage. With a bunch of saplings planted and numbers put down to remember when to stun these, I also moved on to this area next to what will be Frank's cliff. And yes, this is still Tammy. I actually think we will turn this little spot here into a seating area with a log bench and of course a plant behind it. And then with the trees planted, let's grow everything to the correct stage. Perfect. Let's put in some dirt and cobble path up to Frank's house. I'll just pretend that this isn't still Tammy from now on because I quite frankly can't believe that she's still here. And then of course, more trees are needed on top of this cliff as well. The tricky part in this case was figuring out where I even could place them, as well as keeping a small path open towards the back so that I can still use this cliff as a viewing platform. I briefly got distracted by placing a couple more leaf piles around and then went back to placing more trees as well as growing and stunting them. More changes would be needed here, but I decided to call it a day for now. A lot of the main bits of the town have been established at this point, so it's time for more details to really bring everything to life now. I'll start with the area in front of and around Leonardo and Timbra and get a bunch of items ready. Since there is a bit of a horizontal sidewalk here, I will also include the flower bed with some fencing on both sides, and then continue with some wheat fields in between the houses, along with some plants and barrels around the buildings, and some more stacked bags. The gaps here I just filled with a few flowers. I still kind of wanted to try and hide the edge of the path along the houses, or at the very least distract from it, so I placed some more plants along the sides here and then added a couple more leaf and petal piles as well. Every now and again, I had also tried implementing benches in the town because you do see them in the movie a handful of times, and now here, alongside the path, was finally the time to make them happen. And I actually liked it so much, I even put them on both sides, somewhat facing each other. I was able to include another garden wagon peeking through and then decided to cover the empty part to the front with another plant before I spread some more draft flowers on the path, included more wheat fields, a barrel, and of course more plants. Then I grabbed a bunch of shrub starts to start filling up any and all open tiles in front of Leonardo and Timbra's place, as well as behind Beau's house, and afterwards went over to incorporate a bunch of different flowers, as well as weeds and glowing moss. I also filled this little front yard part by Beau's house. Another flower pot by the bench and bamboo grass behind Beau's house, and this little part was done. Oh, and I like the bamboo grass so much, I also added one of those to the plaza sidewalk. Now let's move on to the area in front of Flurry and Hamlet's house and add some more potted flowers here, as well as some barrels and plants. At this point, honestly, I must sound like a broken record. Also, since I had moved Hamlet's house a while ago, I finally adjusted the wheat fields on the right-hand side and added yet another garden wagon to the left. A couple more details in the shape of dropped flowers, some miscellaneous items, and a standee later, I covered the open tiles at the sides and behind the cliff to the front with more shrubs and yellow flowers, and one more small area can be marked off as done. At this point, I had also decided that I did want to actually change that blue incline just because it all felt a little bit too much here, so I tore that one down and then rebuilt it the next day with the log staircase. To continue with the theme of filler spaces, let's work on this little part next to the cliff now. Just behind the bench I'd placed before, I added some more wheat fields, plants, blue flowers, shrubs, and glowing moss. And with enough potted plants, I also placed some barrels and a wooden bucket to the right-hand side, some more stacked bags to the left, and a pillow for a pop of color on the bench. Yet another productive day. A brand new day with a brand new decision power, and we're gonna use it on, you guessed it, fillers. Yay! This time, let's go back to an area that we actually have not seen in a while, the small river to the front. In all seriousness though, this ended up being one of my favorite filler areas probably ever, so let's get started. Due to an awesome idea from the community and a prompt delivery as well, I started by implementing some glowing moss boulders around the river, kind of as though it's a landmass and the water has just kind of been making its way through it. I'm not sure this idea like fully translates in the finished part, but I do think it looks very cute nonetheless. I decided to go for the light green version and then worked on figuring out the location so that we still have decent space around it for either planted things or also wheat fields. Whenever I was sure of the placement, I also ended up putting some dirt path underneath just in case it would peek through for that extra bit of detail. I placed some wheat fields hugging the tree already in place and then started figuring out other possible tree spots along the river so that we get as much foliage as possible. As usual, I first went around just digging holes wherever I would want a tree, trying to not make it too symmetrical or repetitive. I also placed a couple more boulders during the step and then started planting the types of trees I wanted and marking their growth stage with the custom designs. During this process, we also learned how to worry. Thank you, Murphy. I definitely did not know how to do that before. And now let's get everything grown and stunted. Second stage trees, third stage trees, and here goes the fully grown. I also chopped a tree, made some other small corrections, and moved around the fruit saplings for a more efficient layout. And now time to fill it all in. I'll start with some pink flowers to the left and then spread them out nicely in this frame that I'm standing in, and then I'll add glowing moss and sugarcane in between. From the pink flowers, I morphed this into yellow and then made my way over to the right hand side with purple and then orange around the fake building to match the flowers on the roof. And next up, I used blue with some green in between and ended up on pink once again. I also filled in the missing gaps in front of resident services and then started planting different shrub starts, more glowing moss, and more sugarcane as well. Anything still left open after that was promptly covered in weeds. And now with everything up until the fake building covered, it is time to time travel and get this bamboo tree to the correct size, as well as all the shrubs grown. Very good result for the day. The next time I worked on this island, I basically picked up exactly where it left off before and started filling this space between the fake buildings in much the same fashion as before. First, I established some items that I wanted to use, like this garden wagon, some wheat fields, and a tall garden rock. And then I once again used a mixture of shrubs, glowing moss, sugarcane, and of course, some regular weeds alongside the flowers. Some of the last parts still open now are the cliff that Frank lives on. Yes, it's still Tammy, as well as the part in front of it. I decided on yellow flowers for that one and got started on spreading those around. I wanted to kind of hide the side view of the incline, so I put some wheat fields here and then worked other fillers in all around it. That looks pretty good so far, so let's focus on the upstairs part of the cliff now. Since this is Frank's place, aka a toucan, I wanted to tie in a couple of like bird related items such as seed bags and maybe the birdhouse, although I did end up actually scrapping that one later. I'll of course use some more wheat fields here, a barrel by the house, more seed bags to the left as well, and I ended up putting a festive volley lamp behind the barrel as a reference to the feathers. Due to the red hyacinth I had used below, I then decided to plant a couple more of the red flowers on top of this cliff alongside our usual fillers. I kind of struggled a bit with this part in front of the coconut tree being like a little bit too open and repetitive and flat, so I ended up placing another leaf pile here and a monstera, and then finished this part by adding a little planter and duck on top of the seed bags. The leftover stuff in my pockets I was able to utilize around the corn farm along with some purple flowers. There we go. New day, new stream, and time to figure out the last bits and pieces. In the meantime, I'd also gone back to the small river and filled in any open spots that I'd still left before using orange and red flowers, and I actually really like this view. From the town, you're supposed to go over to the casita next, so I wanted to make sure that you have to go up on top of a cliff for a better view of the casita, and because of that, my next task would be to connect the cliff from the fake house here on the left all the way up to the fake house by Leonardo's house on the right. Once I had shaped this into something more or less decent, I also picked up a natural ram from Nook and implemented that as well. A few small cliff adjustments and some time traveling later, I laid down a little bit of path to connect the flagstone path from the town with the new incline, and then I went around to establish the possible tree spots in this part as well, which basically stretched all the way to the fake building in the front. And then, as can be expected, I planted a bunch of saplings as well. Let's stunt all the second stage trees, third stage trees, and there we go. Now I'll use some red flowers in this part along with monstera, some wheat fields on this side and also over here, a cacao tree, and even more flowers. I'll also use a bunch more green fillers and then switch over to orange flowers for the front part alongside more sugarcane, glowing moss, and you know it, shrubs. There we go, another filler space done. The only open part now is this area behind resident services, which I did actually end up filling off stream though, so it is time to finally show you the finished results. And so 15 streams and countless hours have brought us to this point, and I'm very excited to show you the final result of the town. First up, let me show you the map. And here it is. Now, obviously the map, you know, with all that in-game pathing isn't the prettiest thing that I've ever done, but it's also not the worst. Like, I'm actually kind of okay with it. And yep, Tammy is still here. Enough about her though, let me show you around. So right off the bat here, we do have Bunny and Poncho with that building in the background, the cacti kind of on top of the building, and then moving down here, this is our fake building that we can walk into in case you want to, of course. And then you will kind of walk across the resin services. We've got the little corn farm and the fake building, of course, in front of the house. And then this is the area that I decorated after all of the streams. So we've just got a bunch of flowers here, the fake buildings, you know, trees, some books, some cacti, all that kind of stuff around. And then over here, we've got Murphy's house with Samson over on the right. And you can actually still walk down here. So in case you want to see the river, you can kind of walk here, or you can also go and hop over the river on this left side and then kind of still see it from this point, just in case you want to. From Murphy's house, let's continue, I think, downwards first to Beau's house. As you can see, tons of flowers. Everything is very, very colorful. Also, quick note, we do still have the saplings on the sidewalk because, you know, the DA isn't quite ready yet, but that will be fixed in the future. And then going over to the right-hand side, here is our plaza. I have to say, this final result, I actually really, really love, especially if you do the little photo trick by pressing minus and going into first person, going all the way up, and then once again going all the way up. This is kind of a nice frame. Now, obviously, if you did like a perspective built with a cliff, this would be great also. But I am very, very, very happy with this. Then here are the games, and I'll kind of walk past all of this first. We do still have the fake buildings towards the bottom. The campsite is still on the beach, but this is currently my flower storage, so I'll kind of worry about the beaches later on. We do have the little seating spot over here. This is Frank's house. Yes, Frank. We're just gonna be ignorant here. And then we do have this like viewing spot, which I actually think turned out quite cute as well. We've got Hamlet and Flurry living over there, who are both home, which actually looks quite adorable also. So yeah, this house, you know, some stuff still needs to change. I don't know what. But yeah, and then going over to actually Flurry and Hamlet's house, I mean, there's nothing really new here. Lots of fillers, lots of plants, lots of barrels, of course. And then we do have the Able Sisters with the music setup. And then from the Able Sisters, you can also go and look at the corn farm. Now for the corn farm, I will say there's still a bit of backdrop left because yeah, you'll definitely be able to see the cliffs here as well. But this is going to be something I probably focus on when I work on further fillers and like all of the river section kind of. I think that will probably be the last part. A little hidden thing that we also did was we just added a little umbrella. I only had a grape umbrella. I think this will probably be changed, but this is also just a little, little reference to Peppa and her wedding kind of. And then of course, here is the church. Still kind of happy with how this turned out. Was an interesting experience working with the medieval building site. And then heading up here, these are the last two houses. This is Timbra and Leonardo with the kind of layered neighborhood. And then this other one on the side, which I also kind of actually put a little bit higher. Oh yeah, and then this is just a little pathway down Samson's house with the benches on both sides. And then from the town, like actually leaving the town, this will lead you up the incline, which I did landscape further. So there's like a little bit of cliff. And then just off into the distance, you can kind of see glimpses of the casita. But of course, that will be something for another video. Now, of course, I have to build it up first, but once I have, I would also love to make a video on that one. In case you don't want to miss it, make sure that you're subscribed. And also, I would really appreciate a like and comment on this video. Let me know what you think of the town, if I missed any references or if I did a good job. And then thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you have an awesome time until I hopefully see you in one of my next videos. Bye, everyone.